session that we were going to do today, although as we said, with lack of time, we're not going to be able to do it in this format, actually does move some of the discussions that you've already had on to the next step. So we're now looking at implementation, and we're now looking at some of the things that we need to have in place to enable successful implementation of what we've talked about today. I know I've already had a couple of discussions with some of you on this topic during the coffee break about some ideas you've had about the other things that we need to make sure are in place around the topics we talked about today to make them work. So basically, I want to throw things open to the floor. Any questions that you've got, any points you'd like to make about where we go next with this stuff, how we implement it, and also anything about any other things that we need to have in place to make sure this stuff sticks and make it work.
I'll just start with something just on sort of the implementation perhaps around the academic roles is just to see perhaps some more formalised performance management. So in the case of academic staff who do really, really well, and we know there's loads of good practice across this university, but I think at times it's really not recognised, and there isn't that reward for people actually going the extra mile and actually being brilliant academic members of staff, whether that's in teaching and in front-facing student lecturing or supervision of research students and being great researchers. There's not always that recognition, or especially I think around teachers, you know, there isn't that progression because it's so sort of traditional, in my view, snobbery around it being about research, that to be a professor it has to be about research and not always, you know, about people who are actually really, really good at getting across their research informed, but in a really accessible and engaging and relevant way to teachers. But then also where perhaps members of staff are not always performing their roles, and kind of what happens with those members of staff and where can they help to be developed, because we talked about it being quite demoralising as well for tutors and lecturers and academic members of staff who do really well and I'll go in that extra mile, and I see perhaps other people perhaps sometimes getting away with not doing as much.
Okay, thank you,
Caroline. From a very student point of view. So,
can I just very quickly respond to the points that Caroline's raised? In the academic roles handbook that you'll see passed around, you'll see how learning and teaching runs through all of the different academic graded jobs, from new lecturer through to professor, and there is clearly marked out in there career development routes for people who want to make learning and teaching and the oversight of learning and teaching a central part of their job. In addition, to recognise the high quality of the work that is done by lots of people in learning and teaching, there is the Vice-Chancellor's Distinguished Learning and Teaching Awards, and I know that colleagues in the Academic Development Unit want to build on that by creating some fellowship posts that draw academics in to spread the good practice across the university. So we do have those two important routes. The third route I want to draw attention to is something that I believe the Students' Union has been working on, which is to create a student-led prize for staff who are particularly good at learning and teaching.
One of the things that I've found confusing in my 11 years at this university is communication. And the only way we're going to put this in practice is to communicate to our entire body, which isn't just the staff, it isn't just the students, it's all of them together. We can push information down from the top, but we need to find new mechanisms, different ways where we can have horizontal communication across schools, across universities. And unless we can get our act together on communication, we're not going to get the cultural shift that we're expecting here. So communication, for me, is the absolutely fundamental thing we have to do here. What I would like to know is there any way we can facilitate a mechanism for looking at better communication across the entire university? We're exploring different ways, but we need to find more.
Okay, thank you. So point about communication, quite a good point, one which is, I think, something of a hot potato, pretty much any organisation that you work in. However, in response to that and the things that we've been talking about today, the one thing that I would say in terms of my role and where we go next with implementing and launching some of the academic role stuff in particular is around the discussions we've had about whether it should be done directorate level, school level, college level, whatever it may be. It sounds very, very much as there's an awful lot of mileage of drilling down into directorate level to get the input, the analysis, the feedback, but then working across directorates and across schools to share that.
Ian very helpfully summarised some of the things that we've learnt from today and how we're going to learn more from analysing the many other comments that you made. In the first part of this afternoon, I learnt a lot about the importance of sharing with you the work we've done on academic roles, and we've learnt a lot about going out to directorates and listening to people and talking to people. So those are two key points we're going to take out today amongst many others. The second session we talked about assessment. and we talked about the assessment handbook. Now, once again, I think the message for me is about sharing the work that's been done. The other message for me was about making sure that some of the innovations in technology, like e-submission, e-marking, e-feedback, feature throughout that handbook. And one of the challenges that we all face in universities, whether we're in professional services or academic staff side, is that that technology is going to change what we do over the next few years. And what I'm keen to do this afternoon is to hear some feedback from you about how we might best take forward that debate. We want to move towards a world in which there is the opportunity for students to submit their work online, that there is the opportunity for students to check their understanding of academic good conduct through assessing the extent to which they may or may not have inadvertently quoted things in the right or wrong way. We want to move towards a world where people are able to provide feedback in time-efficient ways. You saw an example of that in a group setting, but there may be ways of giving audio feedback online, there may be ways of doing group work online or bringing students into the assessment definition process that makes it more effective learning for them and more efficient for us as the people who ultimately assess their work. So I'm keen to hear your views about that type of world, because it's been a challenge for us. But I think I see a direction of travel in universities around the world which suggests that this is going to be a key challenge in the next few months and few years.
Okay, thank you, Hugh. Any responses or any comments on that?
I'm glad you mentioned that point, Hugh, because it's something that we come up against it in school of built environment, because we have a lot of distance learning students and we have got a lot of text-based submissions, perhaps unlike other colleges and other schools where they have different types of submissions. So we're very much, I suppose, tied or linked to the Turnitin system now. And I think one of the challenges going forward is, and we did talk a little bit about it in our feedback session, is the embracing the right technologies and the effective technologies that enable meaningful feedback for students through those channels. Talking about things like audio feedback and the use of the right software and what have you, where when students re-access their work, they can actually hear some audio feedback from the member of staff. Or the use of tablets where you can actually write over. I mean, people do still like to use pens, as somebody was saying in our group. And there are technologies where you can do that, and the student, again, when they re-access their work, they can see your handwriting. The only thing that I would say is I think we've more work to do on that, because some of those technologies are still a bit clunky. They don't work as well as they should do. So I think, and sorry, the other thing I do think we still have to consider is staff using or having the right technology to be able to assess a great deal of work through a computer screen or digitally. Because if we move to electronic submission, we either do two things. We either take responsibility to print all that work out and mark it, or we use technology and mark it online. And if we mark it online, I think we do have to look at the right technology for that. It's not just about looking at your laptop screen, because that probably is maybe not the best thing for your eyes. So I think there's work to do on the technologies for assessment, because increasingly it's going to be important, and I think it is important and it is the way to go, but we've got to work on looking at those technologies and then doing the staff development work so that staff know how to use those technologies, if you like, to make their jobs easier and to improve the quality of student feedback.
In the cartoon earlier that we saw, there was a roll being rolled up a hill, and one of the rocks in its way was ITS. I apologise if there's anyone from ITS here, but there seems to be a problem, and the technology issues are centred here, that we seem to have an ITS group that are developing a strategy that is separated from our academic profile. We're getting things introduced first, second week of semester, not prototyped and rolled out at more suitable times for students. we're not having the responsive conversation of what we need as academics going into ITS. ITS are pushing technologies out towards us. And this is one of our biggest barriers. The issue with Mac, we have issues with Linux, with various operating systems. Fundamentally, we are using a 10-year-old operating system that is no longer supported in this university. It's fantastic what happens in Media City, but what we have in terms of the rest of the university is a huge problem and becoming more and more so.
I'll respond to that, but I also note that we're getting close to the end of time, so in a moment we'll be moving towards saying some closing remarks. In terms of the rock on the slope, the university has quite sophisticated mechanisms for logging what's going on. So there's an ITS help desk which logs the calls that are being made, and data from that and a variety of other sources goes to a group called the Information Technology Strategy Group, and they review what's going on. Through Students' Union and other mechanisms, we take feedback about what's going on, and I've sat through conversations in recent weeks with academic colleagues and with student union representatives about how we're tackling that. The challenge for the university is back to the economic constraints and the changes. Over the course of the last 2 years, we've invested over £5 million on upgrading the IT infrastructure for the university. And that essentially has meant pulling out all of the old legacy systems that were sitting under people's desks in servers that may or may not have been compliant with health and safety, with industry standards for IT, and with intellectual property right laws. As we've moved to a more centralised system, that's created glitches and challenges. At the same time, we have reorganised ITS as part of that change. I think we're coming through a process of responding to those difficulties. And what we need to do now, back to goats and goals, we need to make sure that we're consulting fully with the student population across the university and the academic staff about what the next phases in that plan might be. A key phase for me under the Learning and Teaching head is the rolling out of Blackboard 9.1. What we're trying to do with the introduction of new software is always pilot it in one area to make sure that we learn lessons from that before we go for a full-scale implementation. But as Brian alluded to earlier, in the course of the next semester, we will be piloting Blackboard 9.1 and all of the add-ons and plugins that go with that within the law school. And Laura and others have been helping us to do that in order to do a full-scale implementation across the university from September. Now, there are other massive pieces of software planned to go in over the course of the next few months and the next year. SharePoint is going to be implemented within the university. We're moving off the Novell platform. We're doing a range of other things to the software backbone. We're going to attempt to reorganise Banner over the course of the next 18 months. All of that, unfortunately, will create problems as it's done, because that's in the nature of life. You don't always get it right every time, all the time. What we have to do is create a mechanism for that dialogue so that you can say, hang on, you might have a problem if you do that, and you can say, this isn't working. Now, in order to do that, it's back to why face-to-face communication is so important. What I learned over the years is that people rarely stab you in the back if you've looked them in the eye. So having those conversations with people face-to-face about these issues is a key critical part of it. So we need to make sure that all of us are making friends with ITS and other parts of the university who we might feel are not always supporting us, encouraging them to make friends with us so that we've got that high degree of trust, so that as we go into a period of rapid change, we are able to change on both sides. Because the change isn't just going to be about them getting it, it's also going to be about us understanding some of the constraints that they operate within.